Hello, friends. Hello. How are you guys doing tonight? Um, oh goodness, look at those dance moves. I wish I had dance moves like that. Hello to everybody. I hope you're having a great night. It's been a pretty good day for me as well. Thank you for joining. Welcome for joining. I'm going to finish up this book tonight. 5 chapters left. Ah! Paige, thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, thank you so much for that resub. It means a whole lot to me, and I appreciate it very, very much. Goodness gracious, I appreciate it. Okay. Hello to everybody, like I said. I'm all like, woo, now. Alright, without further ado, I'm gonna just go ahead and jump right back in to the story, starting with chapter 9. In case you forgot, the Baudelaires just walked into Dr. Orwell's office and saw Count Olaf dressed as the receptionist behind the desk. I appreciate it, Paige. Okay. Chapter 9. Oftentimes when children are in trouble, you will hear people say that it is all because of low self-esteem. Low self-esteem is a phrase which here describes children who do not think much of themselves. They might think that they are ugly, or boring, or unable to do anything correctly, or sometimes a combination of these things, and whether or not they are right, you can see why those sorts of feelings might lead one into trouble. In the vast majority of cases, however, getting into trouble has nothing to do with one's self-esteem. It usually has much more to do with whatever is causing the trouble. A monster, a bus driver, a banana peel, killer bees, the school principal, than what you think of yourself. And so it was, as Violet and Sunny Baudelaire stared at Count Olaf, or as the nameplate on his desk said, Shirley. Sunny and Violet had a very healthy amount of self-esteem. Violet knew she could do things correctly because she'd invented many devices that worked perfectly. Sunny knew she wasn't boring because her siblings always took an interest in what she had to say. And both Baudelaire sisters knew that they weren't ugly because they could see their pleasant facial features reflected back at them in the middle of Count Olaf's shiny, shiny eyes. But it did not matter that they thought these things because they were trapped. Why, hello there, little girls, Count Olaf said in a ridiculously high voice, as if he were really a receptionist named Shirley instead of an evil man after the Baudelaire fortune. What are your names? You know our names, Violet said curtly, a word which here means tired of Count Olaf's nonsense. That wig and that lipstick don't fool us any more than your pale brown dress and sensible beige shoes. You're Count Olaf. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Count Olaf said. I'm Shirley. See my nameplate? Feety, Sunny shrieked, which meant, that nameplate doesn't prove anything, of course. Sunny's right, Violet said. You're not Shirley just because you have a small piece of wood with your name on it. I'll tell you why I'm Shirley, Count Olaf said. I'm Shirley because I would like to be called Shirley, and it is impolite not to do so. Well, but I don't care if I'm impolite to a disgusting person as yourself, Violet said. Count Olaf shook his head. But if you do something impolite to me, he said, then I might do something impolite to you, like for instance tearing your hair out with my bare hands. Violet and Sunny looked at Count Olaf's hands. They had noticed for the first time that he had grown his fingernails very long and painted them bright pink as part of his disguise. The Baudelaire sisters looked at one another. Count Olaf's nails did look very sharp indeed. Okay, Shirley, Violet said. You've been lurking around Paltryville since we arrived, haven't you? Shirley lifted a hand to pat her wig into place. Maybe, she said, still in her foolish high voice. And you've been hiding out in the eye-shaped building this whole time, haven't you? Violet said. Shirley batted her eyes, and Violet and Sunny noticed that beneath her one long eyebrow, another identifying mark of Count Olaf, she was wearing long false eyelashes. Perhaps, she said. And you're in cahoots with Dr. Orwell, Violet said, using a phrase which here means working with in order to capture the Baudelaire fortune. Aren't you? Possibly, Shirley said, crossing her legs and revealing long white stockings imprinted with the pattern of an eye. Popinch, Sunny shrieked. Sunny means, Violet said, that Dr. Orwell hypnotized Klaus and caused that terrible accident, didn't she? Conceivably, Shirley said. And he's being hypnotized again right now, isn't he? Violet asked. It's within the bounds of the imagination, Shirley said. Violet and Sunny looked at one another, their hearts pounding. Violet took her sister's hand and took a step backward toward the door. And now, she said, you're going to try to whisk us away, aren't you? Of course not, Shirley said. I'm going to offer you a cookie like a good little receptionist. You're not a receptionist, Violet cried. I certainly am, Shirley said. I'm a poor receptionist who lives all by herself and who wants very much to raise children of her own. 3 children, in fact. A smarty-pants little girl, a hypnotized little boy, and a buck-toothed baby. Well, you can't raise us, Violet said. We're already being raised by Sir. Oh, he'll hand you over to me soon enough, Shirley said, her eyes shining brightly. Don't be a... Violet said, but she stopped herself before she could say Sir'd. She wanted to say Sir'd. She wanted to say, Sir wouldn't do a thing like that. But inside she wasn't so sure. Sir had already made the 3 Baudelaires sleep in one small bunk bed. He had already made them work in a lumber mill, and he had already only fed them gum for lunch. And as much as she wanted to believe that it was absurd to think that he would simply hand the Baudelaire orphans over to Shirley, Violet was not certain. She was only half sure, and so she stopped herself after half a word. Ab, said a voice behind her. What in the world does Ab mean? Violet and Sunny turned around and saw Dr. Orwell leading Klaus into the waiting room. He was wearing another new pair of glasses and was looking confused. Klaus, Violet cried. We were so worried She stopped herself before she could say out when she saw her brother's expression. It was the same expression he'd had the previous night when he finally came back from his first appointment with Dr. Orwell. Behind his newest pair of glasses, Klaus had wide, wide eyes and a dazed, distant smile as if his sisters were people he did not know so well. There you go again with the ab, Dr. Orwell said. Whatever in the world does it mean? Ab isn't a word, of course, Shirley said. Only a stupid person would say a word like ab. They are stupid, aren't they? Dr. Orwell agreed, as though they were talking about the weather instead of insulting young children. They must have very low self-esteem. I couldn't agree more, Dr. Orwell, Shirley said. Call me Georgina, the horrible optometrist replied, winking. Now, girls, here's your brother. He's a little tired after his appointment, but he'll be fine by tomorrow morning. More than fine, in fact. Much more. She turned and pointed at the door with her jeweled cane. I believe you 3 know the way out. I don't, Klaus said faintly. I don't remember coming in here. That often happens after optometry appointments, Dr. Orwell said smoothly. Now run along, orphans. Violet took her brother by the hand and began to lead him out of the waiting room. We're really free to go, she asked, not believing it for a moment. Of course, Dr. Orwell said, but I'm sure my receptionist and I will see you very soon. After all, Klaus seems to have gotten very clumsy lately. He's always causing accidents. Rupish! Sunny shrieked. She probably meant they're not accidents, they're the results of hypnotism, but the adults paid no attention. Dr. Orwell merely stepped out of the doorway and Shirley wiggled her pink fingers at them in a scrawny wave. Toodaloo, orphans, Shirley said. Klaus looked at Shirley and waved back as Violet and Sunny led him by the hand out of the waiting room. How could you wave to her? Violet hissed to her brother as they walked down the hallway. She seems like a nice lady, Klaus said, frowning, but I think I've met her somewhere before. Ballywot! Sunny shrieked, which undoubtedly meant she's Count Olaf in disguise. If you say so, Klaus said vaguely. Oh, Klaus, Violet said miserably. Sunny and I wasted time arguing with Shirley when we should have been rescuing you. You've been hypnotized again, I know it. Try to concentrate, Klaus. Try to remember what happened. I broke my glasses, Klaus said slowly, and then we left the lumber mill. I'm very tired, Veronica. Can I go to bed? Violet, Violet said. My name is Violet, not Veronica. I'm sorry, Klaus said. I'm just so tired. Violet opened the door of the building, and the 3 orphans stepped out into the depressing street of Paltryville. Violet and Sunny stopped and remembered when they had first reached the lumber mill after getting off the train and had seen the eye-shaped building. Their instincts had told them that the building was trouble, but the children had not listened to their instincts. They had listened to Mr. Poe. We'd better take him to the dormitory, Violet said to Sunny. I don't know what else we can do with Klaus in this state. Then we should tell Sir what's happened. I hope he can help us. Gooree, Sunny agreed glumly. The sisters led their brother through the wooden gates of the mill and across the dirt-floored courtyard to the dormitory. It was almost supper time, and when the children walked inside, they could see the other employees sitting on their bunks and talking quietly among themselves. I see you're back, one of the workers said. I'm surprised you can show your faces around here after what you did to Phil. Oh, come now, Phil said, and the orphans turned to see him lying down on his bunk with his leg in a cast. Klaus didn't mean to do it, did you, Klaus? Mean to do what? Klaus asked quizzically, a word which here means because he didn't know that he had caused the accident that hurt Phil's leg. Our brother's very tired, Violet said quickly. How are you feeling, Phil? Oh, perfectly fine, Phil said. My leg hurts, but nothing else does. I'm really quite fortunate. But enough about me. There's a memo that was left for you. Foreman Flacatono said it was very important. Phil handed Violet an envelope with the word Baudelaire's typed on the front, just like the typed note of welcome the children had found on their first day at the mill. Inside the envelope was a note which read as follows. Memorandum. To the Baudelaire orphans. From Sir. Subject, today's accident. I have been informed that you caused an accident this morning at the mill that injured an employee and disrupted the day's work. Accidents are caused by bad workers, and bad workers are not tolerated at the Lucky Smells lumber mill. If you continue to cause accidents, I will be forced to fire you and send you to live elsewhere. I have located a nice young lady who lives in town who would be happy to adopt 3 young children. Her name is Shirley, and she works as a receptionist. If the 3 of you continue to be bad workers, I will place you under her care. End of chapter 9. I have a whole lot to catch up on, I think. That's okay for interrupting. Hi, Stuart. You believe Shirley is not Olaf at all? Okay. Oh, hello, B. Bucks. I hope you're having a wonderful night tonight. Welcome to the channel. My name is V. Thank you for the follow. I hope you're doing great this Thursday evening. Feel free to introduce yourself to us if you like. Or not. We welcome lurkers just as well. No, this is definitely not Harry Potter. Please don't confuse me. Hello, Timo. Hey, Semi. Every time I go to the optometrist, I never know where I am, and then I wander off for hours. She said my name. Mom, I'm famous. Is Twitch being dumb? Oh, to be advertising Thursday Night Madden. I'm glad you enjoyed Chapter 9. Is the music too loud or is the music okay? You know, I just like that nice relaxing Pokemon music in the background, but I don't want it to be overwhelming. Oh, you accept cuddles? Chat cuddles for warmth, obviously. That means I'm only 1 follow away from 400. B-Bucks was my 399th follower. So my next follower will be 400, which is pretty crazy. Aw, I'm glad Twix is enjoying. This is like Audible but better. I'm glad. That's kind of the point. That's like what I hope for, what I strive for. So, I am also getting hyped for Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but I'm not going to be able to play them until like Saturday at the earliest because I will not be at all home tomorrow when it arrives, which is going to be sad. Yeah, 400 hype. So if tonight's the night we hit 400, I'm going to freak out. But I normally don't get a follow during my reading streams, so I'm surprised that I did get one, but I do appreciate it. Aww. I'm glad you like my voice. Alright, we're moving on. Chapter 10. Violet read the memo out loud to her siblings, and she didn't know whose reaction was more upsetting. As Sunny heard the bad news, she bit her lip in worry. Her tooth was so sharp that tiny drops of blood dribbled down her chin, and this was certainly upsetting. But Klaus didn't seem to hear the memo at all. He just stared into space, and this was worrisome as well. Violet put that memo back into the envelope, sat on the bottom bunk, and wondered what in the world she could do. Bad news, Phil said sympathetically. Remember, sometimes something might seem like bad news, but it could turn out to be a blessing in disguise. Violet tried to smile at Phil, but her smiling muscles just stayed put. She knew, or she thought she knew anyway because she was actually wrong, that the only thing in disguise was Count Olaf. We have to go see Sir, Violet said finally. We have to explain to him what's happened. You're not supposed to see Sir without an appointment, Phil said. Well, this is an emergency, Violet said. Come on, Sunny. Come on. She looked at her brother, who looked back at his older sister with wide, wide eyes. Violet remembered the accident he had caused and all the previous Baudelaire guardians who had been destroyed. She could not imagine that Klaus would be capable of the sort of heinous murders that Count Olaf had committed, but now she could not be sure, not when he was hypnotized. Danelle, Sunny said. Klaus simply cannot go, Violet decided. Phil, will you please keep an eye on our brother while we go and visit Sir? Of course, Phil said. A very close eye, she emphasized, leading Klaus back to the Baudelaire bunk. He's not been himself lately, as I'm sure you've noticed. Please make sure he stays out of trouble. I will, Phil promised. Now, Klaus, Violet said, please get some sleep, and I hope you'll feel better in the morning. Wub, Sunny said, which meant something along the lines of, I hope so too. Klaus lay down on the bunk, and his sisters looked at his bare feet, which were filthy from walking around all day without any shoes on. Good night, Violet, Klaus said. Good night, Susan. Her name is Sunny, Violet said. I'm sorry, Klaus said. I'm just so exhausted. Do you really think I'll feel better in the morning? If we're lucky, Violet said. Now go to sleep. Klaus glanced at his older sister. Yes, sir, he said quietly. He shut his eyes and immediately fell asleep. The eldest Baudelaire tucked the blanket around her brother and took a long, worried glance at him. Then she took Sunny's hand and, with a smile to Phil, walked back out of the dormitory and across the courtyard to the offices. Inside, the two Baudelaires walked past the mirror without even a glance at their reflections and knocked on the door. Come in! The children recognized the booming voice of Sir and nervously opened the door to his office. Sir was sitting at an enormous desk made of dark, dark wood, still smoking a cigar so his face could not be seen behind his cloud of smoke. The desk was covered with papers and folders, and there was a nameplate that read The Boss in letters made of chewed-up gum, just like the lumber mill sign outside. It was difficult to see the rest of the room because there was only one tiny light in the room, which sat on Sir's desk. Next to Sir stood Charles, who gave the children a shy smile as they walked up to their guardian. Do you have an appointment? Sir asked. No, Violet said, but it's very important that I talk to you. I'll decide what's very important, Sir barked. You see this nameplate? It says, The Boss, and that's who I am. It's very important when I say it's very important. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Violet said, but I think you'll agree with me when I explain what's been going on. I know what's been going on, Sir said. I'm the boss. Of course I know. Didn't you get my memo about the accident? Violet took a deep breath and looked Sir in the eye, or at least the part of the cloud of smoke where she thought his eye probably was. The accident, she said finally, happened because Klaus was hypnotized. What your brother does for a hobby is none of my concern, Sir said, and it doesn't excuse accidents. You don't understand, Sir, Violet said. Klaus was hypnotized by Dr. Orwell, who was in cahoots with Count Olaf. Oh no, Charles said. You poor children. Sir, we have to put a stop to this. We are putting a stop to this, Sir said. You children will cause no more accidents, and you'll be safely employed by the lumber mill, otherwise out you go. Sir, Charles cried, you wouldn't throw the children out onto the street. Of course not, Sir said. As I explained in my memo, I met a very nice young lady who works as a receptionist. When I mentioned there were 3 children in my care, she said that if you were ever in any trouble, she'd take you because she's always wanted children of her own. Pulsh, Sunny cried. That is Count Olaf, Violet cried. Do I look like an idiot to you? Sir asked, pointing to his cloud. I have a complete description of Count Olaf from Mr. Poe, and this receptionist looked nothing like him. She was a very nice lady. Did you look for the tattoo? Charles asked. I know that Count Olaf has a tattoo on his ankle, remember? Of course I didn't look for a tattoo, Sir said impatiently. It's not polite to look at a woman's legs. She's not a woman, Violet burst out. I mean, he's not a woman because he's Count Olaf. I saw her nameplate, Sir said. It didn't say Count Olaf. It said Shirley. Feedy, Sunny shrieked, which you already know meant that nameplate doesn't prove anything, of course. But Violet did not have time to translate because Sir was pounding his hands on his desk. Hypnosis, Count Olaf, Feedy, I've had enough of your excuses, he yelled. Your job is to work hard at the lumber mill, not cause accidents. I am busy enough without having to deal with clumsy children. Quickly, Violet thought of something else. Could we call Mr. Poe? She asked. He knows all about Count Olaf, and perhaps he could be helpful. Violet did not add that Mr. Poe was not usually a very helpful person. You want to add the cost of a long-distance phone call to the burden of caring for you? Sir asked. I think not. Let me put it to you in the simplest way that I can. If you screw up again, I will give you away to Shirley. Now, sir, Charles said, these are children. You shouldn't talk to them that way. As you remember, I never thought it was a good idea for the Baudelaires to work in the mill. They should be treated like members of the family. They are being treated like members of the family, Sir said. Many of my cousins live there in the dormitory. I refuse to argue with you, Charles. You're my business partner. Your job is to iron my shirts and cook my omelets and not boss me around. You're right, of course, Charles said softly. I'm sorry. Now get out of here, all of you, Sir barked. I have lots of work to do. Sunny opened her mouth to say something, but knew it would be useless. Violet thought of something else she could point out, but she knew it would be worthless. And Charles started to raise his hand to make a point, but knew it would be bootless, a word which here means useless and worthless. So Charles and the two Baudelaires left the dark office without another word and stood for a moment together in the hallway. Don't worry, Charles whispered. I'm going to help you. How? Violet whispered back. Will you call Mr. Poe and tell him that Count Olaf is here? Ulo? Sunny asked, which meant, will you have Dr. Orwell arrested? Will you hide us from Shirley? Violet asked. Hinnapole? Sunny asked, which meant, will you undo Klaus's hypnotism? No, Charles admitted. I can't do any of those things. Sir would get mad at me, and we can't have that. But tomorrow I'll try and sneak you some raisins at lunchtime, okay? It was not okay, of course. Not at all. Raisins are healthy and they are inexpensive, and some people may even find them delicious, but they are rarely considered helpful. In fact, raisins were one of the least helpful things that Charles could offer if he really wanted to help. But Violet didn't answer him. She was looking down the hallway and thinking. Sunny didn't answer him either because she was already crawling toward the door to the library. The Baudelaire sisters had no time to talk with Charles anymore. They had to figure out a plan, and they had to figure it out quickly. The Baudelaire orphans were in a very difficult situation, and they needed every available moment to come up with something much, much more helpful than raisins. End of chapter 10. Oh, you missed the first 9 chapters. Can we start again? No. Oh, goodness, Timo. I'm sorry that you've been waking up so much. It's okay if you fall asleep, by the way. Is murder excusable if I claim to be hypnotized? I mean, if I am hypnotized. What do you mean there are other the bosses? Oh, yay. Hi, Moocher. How are you doing? I'm sorry you're sick in bed, though. Hope you feel better. Those children ask too many questions. He should have offered raisins, the fool. You got food? Ooh, beef stroganoff. Dang, that sounds yum. I'm sorry. Sorry, Paige. Hopefully you can get some food soon. Okay. Now I'm caught up on chat again. We have 3 more chapters. Okay. Chapter 11. As we have discussed previously, a book's first sentence can often tell you what sort of story that book contains. This book, you will remember, began with the sentence, "The Baudelaire orphans looked out the grimy window of the train and gazed at the gloomy blackness of the finite forest, wondering if their lives would ever get any better." And the story has certainly been as wretched and hopeless as the first sentence promised it would be. I only bring this up now so you can understand the feeling of dread that Violet and Sunny Baudelaire experienced as they opened a book in the library of the Lucky Smells lumber mill. The two Baudelaire sisters already had a feeling of dread, of course. Part of the dread came from how cruelly unfairly Sir had behaved. Another part of the dread came from how Charles, kind as he was, seemed unable to help them. Yet another part of the dread came from the fact that Klaus had been hypnotized once more, and of course the lion's share of the dread. The phrase lion's share here means the biggest part and has nothing to do with lions or sharing. Came from the fact that Count Olaf, or as he was insisting on calling himself currently, Shirley, was back in the Baudelaire's lives and causing so much misery. And there was an extra helping of dread that Violet and Sunny felt when they began Advanced Ocular Science by Georgina Orwell. The first sentence was, "This tome will endeavor to scrutinize in quasi-inclusive breadth." I will be with you momentarily. I will address that in a moment. This This tome will endeavor to scrutinize in quasi-inclusive breadth the epistemology of ophthalmologically contrived appraisals of ocular systems and the subsequent and requisite exertions imperative for explanation of injurious states. And as Violet read it out loud to her sister, both children felt the dread that comes when you begin a very boring and difficult book. "Oh dear," Violet said, wondering what in the world tome meant. "This is a very difficult book." "Garge," Sunny said, wondering what in the world endeavor meant. "If only we had a dictionary," Violet said glumly, "then we might be able to figure out what this sentence even means." "Yash," Sunny pointed out, which meant something like, "and if only Klaus weren't hypnotized, he could tell us what the sentence means." Violet and Sunny sighed and thought of their poor hypnotized brother. Klaus seemed so different from the brother they knew that it was almost as if Count Olaf had already succeeded with his dastardly scheme and destroyed one of the Baudelaire orphans. Klaus usually looked interested in the world around him, and now he had a blank expression on his face. His eyes were usually all squinty from reading, and now they were wide as if he'd been watching TV instead. He was usually alert and full of interesting things to say, and now he was forgetful and almost completely silent. "Who knows if Klaus could define those words for us?" Violet said. He said it felt like parts of his brain had been wiped clean. Maybe he doesn't know all those words when he's hypnotized. I don't think I've heard him define anything since the accident with Phil when he explained the word inordinate. You might as well get some rest, Sunny. I'll wake you up if I read anything useful. Sunny crawled up on the table and lay down next to Advanced Ocular Science, which was almost as big as she was. Violet gazed at her sister for a moment and then turned her attention to the book. Violet liked to read, of course, but at heart she was an inventor, not a researcher. She simply did not have Klaus's amazing reading skills. Violet stared at Dr. Orwell's first sentence again and just saw a mess of difficult words. She knew that if Klaus were in the library and not hypnotized, he would see a way to help them out of their situation. Violet began to imagine how her brother would go about reading Advanced Ocular Science and tried to copy his methods. First, she turned back the pages of the book. Back before even the first page to the table of contents, which, as I'm sure you know, is a list of titles and page numbers of each chapter in a book. Violet had paid scarcely any attention to it when she had first opened the book, but she realized that Klaus would probably examine the table of contents first, so he could see which chapters of the book might be most helpful. Quickly, she scanned the table of contents. 1. Introduction. 2. Basic ophthalmology. 3. Nearsightedness and farsightedness. 4. Blindness. 5. Itchy eyelashes. 6. Damaged pupils. 7. Blinking problems. 8. Winking problems. 9. Surgical practices. 10. Glasses, monocles, and contact lenses. 11. Sunglasses. 12. Hypnosis and mind control. 13. Which eye color is the best one? Immediately, of course, Violet saw that Chapter 12 would be the most helpful, and was glad she thought of looking at the table of contents instead of reading 927 pages until she found something helpful. Grateful that she could skip that daunting first paragraph — the word daunting here means full of incredibly difficult words — she flipped through Advanced Ocular Science until she reached Hypnosis and Mind Control. The phrase stylistic consistency is used to describe books that are similar from start to finish. For instance, the book that you're reading now has stylistic consistency because it began in a miserable way and will continue that way until the very last page. I'm sorry to say that Violet realized as she began Chapter 12 that Dr. Orwell's book had stylistic consistency as well. The first sentence of Hypnosis and Mind Control was, "Hypnosis is an efficacious yet precarious methodology and should not be essayed by neophytes." And it was every bit as difficult and boring as the first sentence of the whole book. Violet reread the sentence and then reread it again, and her heart began to sink. How in the world did Klaus do it? When the three children lived in the Baudelaire home, there was a huge dictionary in their parents' library, and Klaus would often use it to help him with difficult books. But how did Klaus read difficult books when there was no dictionary to be found? It was a puzzle, and Violet knew it was a puzzle she had to solve quickly. She turned her attention back to the book and reread the sentence one more time, but this time she simply skipped the words she did not know. As often happens when one reads in this way, Violet's brain made a little humming noise as she encountered each word, or each part of a word she did not know. So inside her head, the opening sentence of Chapter 12 read as follows. "Hypnosis is a method and should not be by hms." And although she could not tell exactly what it meant, she could guess. It could mean, she guessed to herself, that hypnosis is a difficult method and should not be learned by amateurs. And the interesting thing is that she was not too far off. The night grew later and later, and Violet continued to read the chapter in this way, and she was surprised to learn that she could guess her way through pages and pages of Dr. Orwell's book. This is not the best way to read, of course, because you can make horribly wrong guesses, but it will do in an emergency. For several hours, the Lucky Smells library was completely quiet, except for the turning of pages, as Violet read the book, searching for anything helpful. Every so often she glanced at her sister, and for the first time in her life, Violet wished that Sunny was older than she was. When you are trying to figure out a difficult problem, such as the problem of trying to get your brother unhypnotized so as not to be placed in the hands of a greedy man disguised as a receptionist, it is often helpful to discuss the problem with other people in order to come up with a quick and useful solution. Violet remembered that when the Baudelaires were living with Aunt Josephine, it had been extremely helpful to talk to Klaus about a note that turned out to have a secret hidden within it. But with Sunny it was different. The youngest Baudelaire was charming and well-toothed and quite intelligent for a baby, but she was still a baby, and as Violet hummed through Chapter 12, she worried that she would fail to find a solution with only a baby as a discussion partner. Nevertheless, when she found a sentence that appeared to be useful, she gave Sunny a waking nudge and read the sentence out loud. "Listen to this, Sunny," she said when her sister opened her eyes. "Once a subject has been hypnotized, a simple word will make him or her perform whatever acts any once hummed." Sunny asked. "Those are the words I don't know," Violet explained. "It's difficult to read this way, but I can guess what Dr. Orwell means. I think she means that once you've hypnotized someone, all you need to do is say a certain word and they'll obey you. Remember what Klaus told us he learned in the Encyclopedia Hypnotica? There was that Egyptian king who did chicken imitations, and the merchant who played the violin, and that writer, and all the hypnotists did was say a certain word. But they were all different words. I wonder which word applies to Klaus." "Hees," Sunny said, which probably meant something like, "Beats me, I'm only a baby." Violet gave her a gentle smile and tried to imagine what Klaus would have said if he'd been there unhypnotized in the library with his sisters. "I'll search for more information," she decided. "Brewall," Sunny said, which meant, "and I'll go back to sleep." Both Baudelaires were true to their word, and for a time the library was silent again. Violet hummed through the book and grew more and more exhausted and worried. There were only a few hours left until the working day began, and she was scared that her efforts would be as ineffectual — the word ineffectual here means unable to get Klaus unhypnotized — as if she had low self-esteem. But just as she was about to fall asleep beside her sister, she found a passage in the book that seemed so useful she read it out loud immediately, waking Sunny up in the process. "In order to the hypnotic hold on the Violet said, "the same method is used. A word, uttered out loud, will the immediately. I think Dr. Orwell is talking about getting people unhypnotized, and it has to do with another word being uttered out loud. If we could figure out that one, we could unhypnotize Klaus and we won't fall into Shirley's clutches." "Skell," Sunny said, rubbing her eyes. She probably meant something like, "But I wonder what that word is." "I don't know," Violet said, "but we'd better figure out before it's too late." Sunny said, making a humming noise because she was thinking, rather than because she was reading a word she did not know. Violet said, which meant she was thinking too. But then there was another that made the two Baudelaire sisters look at one another in worry. This was not the of a brain that did not know what a word meant, or the of a person thinking. This was much longer and louder, and it was a that made the Baudelaire sisters stop their thinking and hurry out of the library, clutching Dr. Orwell's book in their trembly hands. It was the of the lumber mill's saw. Somebody had turned on the mill's deadliest machine in the early hours of the morning. Violet and Sunny hurried across the courtyard, which was quite dark in the first few rays of the sun. Hurriedly they opened the doors of the mill and looked inside. Foreman Flacatono was standing near the entrance with his back to the two girls, pointing a finger and giving an order. The rusty sawing machine was whirring away, making that dreadful humming sound, and there was a log on the ground all ready to be pushed into the saw. The log seemed to be covered in layers and layers of string, the string that had been inside the string machine before Klaus had smashed it. The two sisters took a better look, stepping farther into the mill, and saw that the string was wrapped around something else, tying a large bundle to the log. And when they took an even better look, peeking from behind Foreman Flacatono, they saw that the bundle was Charles. He was tied to the log with so much string that he looked a bit like a cocoon, except that a cocoon had never looked this frightened. Layers of string were covering his mouth so he could not make a sound, but his eyes were uncovered and he was staring in terror at the saw as it drew closer and closer. Yes, you little twerp, Foreman Flakatono was saying. You've been fortunate so far avoiding my boss's clutches, but no more. One more accident and you'll be ours, and this will be the worst accident the lumber mill has ever seen. Just imagine Sir's displeasure when he learns that his partner has been sliced into human boards. Now, you lucky man, go and push the log into the saw. Violet and Sunny took a few more steps forward, near enough that they could reach out and touch Foreman Flakatono, not that they wanted to do such a disgusting thing, of course, and saw their brother. Klaus was standing at the controls of the sawing machine in his bare feet, staring at the foreman with his wide, blank eyes. Yes, sir, he said, and Charles's eyes grew wide with panic. End of chapter 11. Oh man, there's a lot that happened. Okay, first off, Riddy. Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for that sub. I am honored and humbled that you would want to do such a thing for me anyway. Thank you for the host, Jake. How are you? I'll catch up with you in a second. But Riddy, wow, thank you so much for that sub. I can't express my appreciation. Oh, did Semi gift you that sub? Aw, Semi, that was so sweet. Oh, thank you. I tried really hard to pronounce those words right. Nailed it, first try. Yes, Riddy is a positive, wonderful lioness-shaped light in all lives. Oh, that's awesome. Number one, thank you, Semi, and number one, thank you, Riddy, for being the, I guess, the, like, the name attached to the donation. Thank you. I just appreciate it. Oh, gosh, Semi, don't worry about that at all. I'm just super appreciative. Ooh, butternut squash soup? I'm not a huge fan of butternut squash soup, but sometimes I find a good one. Oh, squash makes you vomit? I love yellow squash and zucchini. That stuff is like my jam. Tara has a winking problem. I've only got sippy cups. I'm trying to catch up. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry I didn't start over for you, Stuart. You can feel free to catch up on my reading streams if you want to. I archive all of them to my YouTube. Beats me, I'm only a baby, an excuse I use often. Okay, enjoy lurking, Semi. Thank you again for the gift sub for Riddy. Staring in terror, that's me. And hey again, Jake, great to see you. I am back. Aw, Jake, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Paige. I'm not trying to make you sick. I know what all the plate talk is, you guys with your opas. I'm so happy you're one of my subs now too, Riddy. Hashtag caw for Audible. Well, sure. Has Caw done any book streams? Okay, let's see. I dropped a few frames earlier. I don't know why, but all right. Let me take a sip of water because I'm a little dry. So, like, It's like people, like there was a joke when I was playing Shattered Medallion where like if you go Opa and you like smash a plate in celebration, and so Tara's always smashing plates when everybody Opas. Oh, you meant V. Oh yeah, I'm not Ka. Different person. Opa! Look under the table, the frames could be there. Alright. We only have 2 more chapters, and Charles is almost dead. Rutrow. Rutrow, my internet is yellow. Rutrow. Okay, it's green again. I got worried there for a sec. My internet went, like, yellow to orange to back to yellow. Now it's green again, though, so I think we good. I think we good. Okay. Moving on. 2 more chapters. Chapter 12. Klaus! Violet cried. Klaus, don't do it! Foreman Flacatono whirled around, his beady eyes glaring from over his surgical mask. Why, if it isn't the other 2 midgets, he said, you're just in time to see the accident. It's not an accident, Violet said. You're doing this on purpose. Let's not split hairs, the foreman said, using an expression which here means argue over something that's not important at all. You've been in on it all this time? Violet shouted. You're in cahoots with Dr. Orwell and Shirley. So what? Foreman Flacatono said. Deloony! Sonny shrieked, which meant something along the lines of, you're not just a bad foreman, you're an evil person. I don't know what you mean, little midget, Foreman Flacatono said, and I don't care. Klaus, you lucky boy, please continue. No, Klaus, Violet shouted. No! Kutu! Sonny shrieked. Your words will do no good, Foreman Flacatono said. See? Sonny saw all right as she watched her barefoot brother walking over to the log as if his sisters had not spoken. But Violet was not looking at her brother. She was looking at Foreman Flacatono and thinking of everything he had said. The terrible foreman was right, of course. The words of the 2 unhypnotized Baudelaires would do no good, but Violet knew that some word would help. The book she was holding had told her in between hms that there was a word that was used to command Klaus and a word that would unhypnotize him. The eldest Baudelaire realized that Foreman Flacatono must have just used the command word now, and she was trying to remember everything he had said. He'd called Klaus a twerp, but it seemed unlikely that twerp would be the word. He'd said log and he'd said push, but those didn't seem likely either. She realized with despair that the command word could be almost anything. That's right, Foreman Flacatono said as Klaus reached the log. Now in the name of Lucky Smell's lumber mill, push the log into the path of the saw. Violet closed her eyes and racked her brain, a phrase which here means tried to think of other times the command word must have been used. Foreman Flacatono must have used it when Klaus was causing the first accident, the one that broke Phil's leg. You lucky midget, Violet remembered the foreman had said, will be operating the machine, and Klaus had said, yes, sir, in that faint hypnotized voice, the same voice he had used before he had gone to sleep just the previous night. Egu! Sonny shrieked in fear, as the of the saw grew louder and rougher. Klaus had pushed the log up to the saw, and Charles's eyes grew even wider as the blade began to slice the wood, getting closer and closer to where Charles was tied up. As she remembered Klaus's yes, sir, before he went to sleep, Violet realized that she must have used the command word by herself by accident. She racked her brain again, straining to remember the conversation. Klaus had called his baby sister Susan instead of Sonny, and then asked if he would really feel better in the morning, but what had Violet replied? Keep pushing, you lucky midget, Foreman Flacatono said, and Violet knew in an instant. Lucky. Lucky! The eldest Baudelaire shouted, not bothering to hide the word in a sentence as the foreman did. Push the log away from the saw, Klaus. Yes, sir, Klaus said quietly, and the Baudelaire sisters saw with relief that he pushed the log away from the whirling blade just as Charles's toes were about to be sliced. Foreman Flacatono whirled around and stared at Violet in a beady rage. She knew that he knew that she knew. Lucky, he snarled. Push the log back toward the saw, Klaus. Yes, sir, Klaus muttered. Lucky, Violet cried. Push the log away. Yes, sir, Klaus murmured. Lucky, Foreman Flacatono barked. Toward the saw. Lucky, away! Lucky, toward the saw. Lucky, away! Lucky, toward the saw! Lucky! Bellowed a new voice from the doorway, and everyone, including Violet, Klaus, Sunny, and Foreman Flakitono, turned around. Even Charles tried the best he could to see Dr. Orwell, who had appeared in the doorway along with Shirley, who was lurking behind the hypnotist. We just stopped by to make sure everything went well, Dr. Orwell said, gesturing to the saw with her black cane. And I'm certainly glad we did. Lucky, she shouted to Klaus. Do not listen to your sisters. What a good idea, Foreman Flakitono said to the doctor. I never thought of that. That's why you're only a foreman, Dr. Orwell replied snobbily. Lucky, Klaus. Push the log in the path of the saw. Yes, sir, Klaus said, and began to push the log again. Please, Klaus, Violet cried. Don't do this. Geis, Sunny shrieked, which meant don't hurt Charles. Please, Dr. Orwell, Violet cried. Don't force my brother to do this terrible thing. It is a terrible thing, I know, Dr. Orwell said. But it's a terrible thing that the Baudelaire fortune goes to you three brats instead of to me and Shirley. We're going to split the money 50-50. After expenses, Georgina, Shirley reminded her. After expenses, of course, Dr. Orwell said. The hum of the saw began making its louder, rougher sound as the blade started to slice the log once more. Tears appeared in Charles's eyes and began to run down the string, tying him to the log. Violet looked at her brother and then at Dr. Orwell and dropped the heavy book on the ground in frustration. What she needed now and most desperately was the word that would unhypnotize her brother, but she had no idea what it could be. The command word had been used many times, and Violet had been able to figure out which word had been used over and over, but Klaus had only been unhypnotized once, after the accident that had broken Phil's leg. She and her sister had known in the moment he started defining a word for the employees that Klaus was back to normal, but who knew what word caused him that afternoon to suddenly stop following Foreman Flakitono's orders? Violet looked from Charles's tears to the ones appearing in Sunny's eyes as the fatal accident grew nearer and nearer. In a moment, it seemed they would watch Charles die a horrible death, and then they would most certainly be placed in Shirley's care. After so many narrow escapes from Count Olaf's treachery, this seemed to be the moment of his, or in this case her, terrible triumph. Out of all the situations Violet thought to herself that she and her siblings had been in, this was the most miserably irregular. It was the most miserably immoderate. It was the most miserably disorderly and the most miserably excessive. And as she thought all these words, she thought of the one that had unhypnotized Klaus, the one that might just save all their lives. Inordinate! She shouted, as loudly as she could to be heard over the terrible noise of the saw. Inordinate! 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 Klaus blinked and then looked all around him as if someone had just dropped him in the middle of the mill. Where am I? He asked. Klaus! Violet said in relief. You're here with us! Drat! Dr. Orwell said. He's unhypnotized. How in the world would a child know a complicated word like inordinate? These brats know lots of words, Shirley said in her ridiculously fake high voice. They're book addicts, but we can still create an accident and win the fortune. No, you can't, Klaus cried and stepped forward to push Charles out of the way. Yes, we can, Foreman Flakitono said and stuck his foot out again. You would think that such a trick would only work a maximum of 2 times, but in this case you would be wrong, and in this case Klaus fell to the floor again, his head clanging against the pile of debarkers and tiny green boxes. No, you can't! Violet cried and stepped forward to push Charles out of the way herself. Oh, yes, we can, Shirley said in her silly high voice and grabbed Violet's arm. Foreman Flakitono quickly grabbed the other arm, and the eldest Baudelaire found herself trapped. Oh, Tonoy! Sunny cried and crawled toward Charles. She was not strong enough to push the log away from the saw, but she thought she could bite through his string and set him free. Oh, yes, we can, Dr. Orwell said, and reached down to grab the youngest Baudelaire. But Sunny was ready. Quickly she opened her mouth and bit down on the hypnotist's hand as hard as she could. Gack! Dr. Orwell shouted, using an expression that is in no particular language. But then she smiled and used an expression that was in French. On guard. On guard, as you may know, is an expression people use when they wish to announce the beginning of a sword fight, and with a wicked smile, Dr. Orwell pressed the red jewel on top of her black cane, and a shiny blade emerged from the opposite end. In just 1 second, her cane had become a sword, which she then pointed at the youngest Baudelaire orphan. But Sunny, being only an infant, had no sword. She only had her 4 sharp teeth, and looking Dr. Orwell right in the eye, she opened her mouth and pointed all 4 at this despicable person. There is a loud clink noise that a sword makes when it hits another sword, or in this case a tooth, and whenever I hear it I am reminded of a sword fight I was forced to have with a television repairman not long ago. Sunny, however, was only reminded of how much she did not want to be sliced to bits. Dr. Orwell swung her cane sword at Sunny, and Sunny swung her teeth at Dr. Orwell, and soon the clink noises were almost as loud as the sawing machine, which continued to saw up the log toward Charles. Clink! Up, the blade inched until it was only a hair's breadth. The expression hair's breadth here means a teeny tiny measurement away from Charles's foot. Klaus! Violet cried, struggling in the grips of Shirley and Foreman Flacatono. Do something! Your brother can't do anything, Shirley said, giggling in a most annoying way. He's just been unhypnotized. He's too dazed to do anything. Foreman Flacatono, let's both pull. We can make Violet's armpits sore that way. Shirley was right about Violet's sore armpits, but she was wrong about Klaus. He had just been unhypnotized, and he was quite dazed, but he wasn't too dazed to do anything. The trouble was he simply couldn't think of what to do. Klaus had been thrown into the corner with the debarkers and the gum, and if he moved in the direction of Charles or Violet, he would walk right into Sunny and Dr. Orwell's sword fight, and as he heard another clink from the sword hitting Sunny's tooth, he knew he would be seriously wounded if he tried to walk through the dueling pair. But over the clinks, he heard an even louder and even rougher noise from the sawing machine, and Klaus saw with horror that the blade was beginning to slice through the soles of Charles's shoes. Sir's partner tried to wiggle his feet away from the blade, but they were tied too tightly, and tiny shoe sole shavings began to fall to the floor of the mill. In a moment, the blade would be finished with the sole of Charles's shoe and begin on the sole of Charles's foot. Klaus needed to invent something to stop the machine, and he needed to invent it right away. Klaus stared at the circular blade of the saw, and his heart began to sink. How in the world did Violet do it? Klaus had a mild interest in mechanical things, but at heart he was a reader, not an inventor. He simply did not have Violet's amazing inventing skills. He looked at the machine and just saw a deadly device, but he knew that if Violet were in this corner of the mill and not getting sore armpits from Shirley and Foreman Flacatono, she would see a way to help them out of their situation. Klaus tried to imagine how his sister would go about inventing something right there on the spot and tried to copy her methods. Clink! Klaus looked around him for inventing materials, but saw only debarkers and tiny green boxes of gum. Immediately he ripped open a box of gum and shoved several pieces into his mouth, chewing ferociously. The expression gum up the works does not actually have to do with gum, but merely refers to something that stops the progress of something else. Klaus chewed and chewed the gum, hoping that the stickiness of the gum could gum up the works of the sawing machine and stop the deadly progress of the blade. Clink! Sunny's third tooth hit the blade of Dr. Orwell's sword, and Klaus quickly spat the gum out of his mouth into his hand and threw it at the machine as hard as he could. But it merely fell to the ground with a wet plop. Klaus realized that gum didn't weigh enough to reach the machine. Like a feather or a piece of paper, the wad of gum simply couldn't be thrown very far. Hookada, hookada, hookada! The machine began making the loudest and roughest noise that Klaus had ever heard. Charles closed his eyes, and Klaus knew that the blade must have hit the bottom of his foot. He grabbed a bigger handful of gum and shoved it into his mouth, but he didn't know if he could chew enough gum to make a heavy enough invention. Unable to watch the saw any longer, he looked down, and when his eye fell upon one of the debarkers, he knew he could invent something after all. When Klaus looked at the lumber mill equipment, he remembered a time when he was even more bored than when he was working at Lucky Smells. This especially boring time happened a very long time ago, when the Bodler parents were still alive. Klaus had read a book on different kinds of fish and asked his parents if they would take him fishing. His mother warned him that fishing was one of the most boring activities in the world, but found 2 fishing poles in the basement and agreed to take him to the nearby lake. Klaus had been hoping that he would get to see the different types of fish he had read about, but instead he and his mother sat in a rowboat in the middle of a lake and did nothing for an entire afternoon. He and his mother had to keep quiet so as to not scare the fish away, but there were no fish, no conversation, and absolutely no fun. You might think that Klaus would not want to remember such a boring time, particularly in the middle of a crisis, but one detail of this very boring afternoon turned out to be extremely helpful. As Sunny struggled with Dr. Orwell, Violet struggled with Shirley and Foreman Flacatono, and poor Charles struggled with the saw, Klaus remembered the part of the fishing process known as casting. Casting is the process of using one's fishing pole to throw one's fishing line out into the middle of the lake in order to try to catch a fish. In the case of Klaus and his mother, the casting hadn't worked, but Klaus did not want to catch fish. He wanted to save Charles's life. Quickly, the middle Baudelaire grabbed the debarker and spat his gum onto one end of it. He was planning to use the sticky gum as a sort of fishing line and the debarker as a sort of fishing pole in order to throw gum all the way to the saw. Klaus's invention looked more like a wad of gum at the end of a strip of metal than a real fishing pole, but Klaus didn't care how it looked. He only cared whether it would stop the saw. He took a deep breath and cast the debarker the way his mother taught him to cast his fishing pole. Plop! To Klaus's delight, the gum stretched over Dr. Orwell and Sonny, who were still fighting, just as the fishing line will stretch out across the surface of a lake. But to Klaus's horror, the gum did not land on the saw. It landed on the string that was tying the wriggling Charles to the log. Klaus watched Charles wriggle and was once again reminded of a fish, and it occurred to him that perhaps his invention had worked after all. Gathering up all of his strength, and after working at a lumber mill for a while, he actually had quite a bit of strength for a young boy. He grabbed his invention and pulled. Klaus pulled on his debarker, and the debarker pulled on the gum, and the gum pulled on the log, and to the relief of all three Baudelaire orphans, the log moved to one side. It did not move very far, and it did not move very quickly, and it certainly did not move very gracefully, but it moved enough. The horrible noise stopped, and the blade of the saw kept slicing, but the log was far enough out of the way that the machine was simply slicing thin air. Charles looked at Klaus, and his eyes filled with tears, and when Sonny turned to look, she saw that Klaus was crying too. But when Sonny turned to look, Dr. Orwell had her chance. With a swing of one of her big, ugly boots, she kicked Sonny to the ground and held her in place with one foot. Then, standing over the infant, she raised her sword high in the air and began to laugh, a loud, horrible snarl of a laugh. "I do believe," she said, cackling, "that there will be an accident at Lucky Smell's lumber mill after all." And Dr. Orwell was right. There was an accident at the lumber mill, after all. A fatal accident, which is a phrase to describe one that kills somebody. For just as Dr. Orwell was about to bring her sword down on little Sonny's throat, the door of the lumber mill opened, and Sir walked into the room. "What in the world is going on?" he barked, and Dr. Orwell turned to him, absolutely surprised. When people are absolutely surprised, they sometimes take a step backward, and taking a step backward can sometimes lead to an accident. Such was the case at this moment, for when Dr. Orwell stepped backward, she stepped into the path of the whirring saw, and there was a very ghastly accident indeed. It's the end of chapter 12. I'm a little too excited about Charles being almost dead, sorry. He knew that she knew that he knew. You can make the decision, Paige. On Gary. That Orwell really keeps an eye on the people. Hi, Gloria. Slowest saw ever. A deadly device. I know, I heard that coming out of my mouth as I was reading it. I could throw a gun pretty far. Casting. Looks like Klaus needs to use the perfect cast. Chewing gum is really gross. Chewing gum I hate the most. You don't like gum? I like gum okay. I don't chew a lot of it though. Pie. So many Willy Wonka references. Oh, I'm sorry you're sick, Gloria. I hope you feel better. Hey, Carly. How you doing tonight? Great to see you. All right, let me drink the last of this water that's in this bottle, and we will finish up the last chapter of this book. Whoops. That I tried to get it in my trash can and it didn't work. All right, guys. Y'all ready for chapter 13? Dreadful, 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 Sir said, shaking the cloud of smoke that covered his head. Dreadful, dreadful, dreadful. I quite agree, Mr. Poe said, coughing into his handkerchief. When you called me this morning and described the situation, I thought it was so dreadful that I canceled several important appointments and took the first available train to Paltryville in order to handle this matter personally." "We appreciate it very much," Charles said. "Dreadful, dreadful, dreadful," Sir said again. The Baudelaire orphans sat together on the floor of Sir's office and looked up at the adults discussing the situation, wondering how in the world they could talk about it so calmly. The word dreadful, even when used 3 times in a row, did not seem like a dreadful enough word to describe everything that had just happened. Violet was still trembling from how Klaus had looked while hypnotized. Klaus was still shivering from how Charles had almost been sliced up. Sunny was still shaking from how she had almost been killed in the sword fight with Dr. Orwell, and of course all 3 orphans were still shuddering from how Dr. Orwell had met her demise, a phrase which here means stepped into the path of a sawing machine. The children felt as if they could barely speak at all, let alone participate in the conversation. "It's unbelievable," Sir said, "that Dr. Orwell was really a hypnotist and that she hypnotized Klaus in order to get a hold of the Baudelaire fortune. Luckily, Violet figured out how to unhypnotize her brother and he didn't cause any more accidents." "It's unbelievable," Charles said, "that Foreman Flacatono grabbed me in the middle of the night and tied me to that log in order to get a hold of the Baudelaire fortune. Luckily, Klaus invented something that shoved the log out of the path of the saw just in time, and I have only a small cut on my foot." "It's unbelievable," Mr. Poe said after a short cough, "that Shirley was going to adopt the children in order to get a hold of the Baudelaire fortune. Luckily, we realized her plan, and now she has to go back to being a receptionist." At this, Violet could not keep quiet any longer. "Shirley is not a receptionist," she cried. "She's not even Shirley. She's Count Olaf." "Now that," Sir said, "is the part of the story that is so unbelievable I don't believe it. I met this young woman, and she isn't at all like Count Olaf. She has 1 eyebrow instead of 2, that's true, but plenty of wonderful people have that characteristic." "You must forgive the children," Mr. Poe said. "They tend to see Count Olaf everywhere." "That's because he is everywhere," Klaus said bitterly. "Well," Sir said, "he hasn't been out here in Paltryville. We've been looking out for him, remember?" "We leaf!" Sunny cried. She meant something along the lines of, "But he was in disguise as usual." "Can we go see this Shirley person?" Charles asked timidly. "The children do seem fairly sure of themselves. Perhaps if Mr. Poe could see this receptionist, we could clear the matter up." "I put Shirley and Foreman Flacatono in the library and asked Phil to keep an eye on them," Sir said. "Charles's library turns out to be useful at last as a substitute jail until we clear up the matter." "The library was plenty useful, sir," Violet said. "If I hadn't read up on hypnosis, your partner Charles would be dead." "You certainly are a clever child," Charles said. "Yes," Sir agreed. "You'll do wonderfully at boarding school." "Boarding school?" Mr. Poe asked. "Of course," Sir replied, nodding his cloud of smoke. "You don't think I'd keep them now, do you, after all the trouble they've caused my lumber mill?" "But that wasn't our fault!" Klaus cried. "That doesn't matter," Sir said. "We made a deal. The deal was that I would try to keep Count Olaf away and you wouldn't cause any more accidents. You didn't keep your end of the deal." "Heck!" Sunny shrieked, which meant, "But you didn't keep your end of the deal either." Sir paid no attention. "Well, let's go see this woman," Mr. Poe said, "and we can settle once and for all whether or not Count Olaf was here." The 3 grown-ups nodded, and the 3 children followed them down the hallway to the library door where Phil was sitting on a chair with a book in his hands. "Hello, Phil," Violet said. "How's your leg?" "Oh, it's getting better," he said, pointing to his cast. "I've been guarding the door, sir, and neither Shirley nor Foreman Flacatono have escaped. Oh, and by the way, I've been reading this book, The Paltryville Constitution. I don't understand all of the words, but it sounds like it's illegal to pay someone in only coupons." "We'll talk about that later," Sir said quickly. "We need to see Shirley about something." Sir reached forward and opened the door to reveal Shirley and Foreman Flacatono sitting quietly at 2 tables near the window. Shirley had Dr. Orwell's book in one hand and waved at the children with another. "Hello there, children," she called in her phony high voice. "I was so worried about you." "So was I," Foreman Flacatono said. "Thank goodness I'm unhypnotized now, so I'm not treating you badly any longer." "So you were hypnotized too?" Sir asked. "Of course we were," Shirley cried. She leaned down and patted all 3 children on the head. "We never would have acted so dreadfully otherwise, not to 3 such wonderful and delicate children." Behind her false eyelashes, Shirley's shiny eyes gazed at the Baudelaires as if she were going to eat them as soon as she got the opportunity. "You see?" Sir said to Mr. Poe. "No wonder it was unbelievable that Foreman Flacatono and Shirley acted so horribly. Of course she's not Count Olaf." "Count who?" Foreman Flacatono asked. "I never heard of the man." "Me neither," Shirley said, "but I'm only a receptionist." "Perhaps you're not only a receptionist," Sir said. "Perhaps you're also a mother. What do you say, Mr. Poe? Shirley really wants to raise these children, and they're much too much trouble for me." "No!" Klaus cried. "She's Count Olaf, not Shirley." Mr. Poe coughed into his white handkerchief a great length, and the three Baudelaires waited tensely for him to finish coughing and say something. Finally, he removed his handkerchief from his face and said to Shirley, "I'm sorry to say this, ma'am, but the children are convinced that you are a man named Count Olaf disguised as a receptionist." "If you'd like," Shirley said, "I could take you to Dr. Orwell's office, the late Dr. Orwell's office, and show you my nameplate. It clearly reads Shirley." "I'm afraid that would not be sufficient," Mr. Poe said. "Would you do us all the courtesy of showing us your left ankle?" "Why, it's not polite to look at a lady's legs," Shirley said. "Surely you know that." "If your left ankle does not have the tattoo of an eye on it," Mr. Poe said, "then you are most certainly not Count Olaf." Shirley's eyes shone very, very bright, and she gave everyone in the room a big toothy smile. "And what if it does?" she asked, and hitched up her skirt slightly. "What if it does have a tattoo of an eye on it?" Everyone's eyes turned to Shirley's ankle, and one eye looked back at them. It resembled the eye-shaped building of Dr. Orwell, which the Baudelaire orphans felt had been watching them since they arrived in Paltryville. It resembled the eye on the cover of Dr. Orwell's book, which the Baudelaire orphans felt had been staring at them since they began working at the Lucky Smells lumber mill. And of course it looked exactly like Count Olaf's tattoo, which is what it was, and which the Baudelaire orphans felt had been gazing at them since their parents had died. "In that case," Mr. Poe said, after a pause, "you're not Shirley. You are Count Olaf, and you are under arrest. I order you to take off the rest of that ridiculous disguise." "Well, should I take off my ridiculous disguise as well?" Foreman Flacatono asked, and tore his white wig off with one smooth motion. It did not surprise the children that he was bald. They had known his absurd hair was a wig from the moment they laid eyes on him. There was something about the shape of his bald head that suddenly seemed familiar. Glaring at the orphans with his beady eyes, he grabbed his surgical mask from his face and removed that too. A long nose uncurled itself from where it had been pressed down to his face, and the siblings saw in an instant that it was one of Count Olaf's assistants. "It's the bald man!" Violet cried. "With the long nose!" Klaus cried. "Plamo!" Sonny cried, which meant "Who works for Count Olaf?" "I guess we're lucky enough to capture 2 criminals today," Mr. Poe said sternly. "Well, 3, if you include Dr. Orwell." Count Olaf, and what a relief it is to call him that instead of Shirley, said. "Enough nonsense," Mr. Poe said. "You, Count Olaf, are under arrest for various murders and attempted murders, various frauds and attempted frauds, and various despicable acts and attempted despicable acts, and you, my bald, long-nosed friend, are under arrest for helping him." Count Olaf shrugged, sending his wig toppling to the floor, and smiled at the Baudelaires in a way they were sorry to recognize. It was a certain smile that Count Olaf had just when it looked like he was trapped. It was a smile that looked as if Count Olaf were telling a joke, and it was a smile accompanied by his eyes shining brightly and his evil brain working furiously. "This book was certainly helpful to you orphans," Count Olaf said, holding Dr. Orwell's advanced ocular science high in the air. "And now it will help me." With all his rotten might, Count Olaf turned and threw the heavy book right through one of the library windows. With a crash of tinkling glass, the window shattered and left a good-sized hole. The hole was just big enough for a person to jump through, which is exactly what the bald man did, wrinkling his long nose at the children as if they smelled bad. Count Olaf laughed a horrible, rough laugh and followed his comrade out the window and away from Paltryville. "I'll be back for you, orphans," he called. "I'll be back for your lives." "Egad," Mr. Poe said, using an expression which here means, "Oh no, he's escaping!" Sir quickly stepped up to the window and peered out after Count Olaf and the bald man, who were running as fast as their skinny legs could carry them. "Don't come back here!" Sir yelled out after them. "The orphans won't be here, so don't bother returning." "What do you mean the orphans won't be here?" Mr. Poe asked sternly. "You made a deal, and you didn't keep your end of it. Count Olaf was here after all." "That doesn't matter," Sir said, waving one of his hands dismissively. "Wherever these Baudelaires go, misfortune follows, and I will have no more of it." "But, sir," Charles said, "they're such good children." "I won't discuss it anymore," Sir said. "My nameplate says The Boss, and that's who I am. The boss has the last word, and the last word is this. The children are no longer welcome at Lucky Smells lumber mill." Violet, Klaus, and Sonny looked at one another. "The children are no longer welcome at Lucky Smells," of course, is not the last word, because it is many words. And they knew, of course, that when Sir said the last word, he didn't mean one word, but the final opinion on the situation. But their experience at the lumber mill had been so very dreadful that they didn't very care much that they were leaving Paltryville. Even a boarding school sounded like it would be better than their days with Foreman Flacatono, Dr. Orwell, and the evil Shirley. I'm sorry to tell you that the orphans were wrong about boarding school being better, but at the moment they knew nothing of the troubles ahead of them, only of the troubles behind them, and the troubles that had escaped out the window. "Can we please discuss the matter later?" Violet asked, "and call the police now? Maybe Count Olaf could be caught." Excellent idea, Violet, Mr. Poe said, although of course he should have thought of that idea earlier himself. Sir, please take me to your telephone so we can call the authorities. Oh, all right, Sir said grumpily. But remember, this is my last word on the matter. Charles, make me a milkshake. I'm very thirsty. Yes, sir, Charles said, and limped out after his business partner and Mr. Poe, who was already out of the library. Halfway out the door, however, he stopped and smiled apologetically at the Baudelaires. I'm sorry, he said to them. I'm sorry that I won't be seeing you anymore, but I guess Sir knows best. We're sorry too, Charles, Klaus said, and I'm sorry that I caused you so much trouble. It wasn't your fault, Charles said kindly, as Phil limped up behind him. What happened? Phil asked. I heard breaking glass. Count Olaf got away, Violet said, and her heart sank as she realized it was really true. Shirley was really Count Olaf in disguise, and he got away just like he always does. Well, if you look on the bright side, you're really quite lucky, Phil said, and the orphans gave their optimistic friend a curious look and then looked curiously at one another. Once they had been happy children, so content and pleased with their life that they hadn't even known how happy they were. Then came the terrible fire, and it seemed since then that their lives had scarcely had one bright moment, let alone an entire bright side. From home to home they had traveled, encountering misery and wretchedness wherever they went, and now the man who had caused such wretchedness had escaped once more. They certainly didn't feel very lucky. What do you mean? Klaus asked quietly. Well, let me think, Phil said, and thought for a moment. In the background, the orphans could hear the dim sounds of Mr. Poe describing Count Olaf to somebody on the telephone. You're alive, Phil said finally. That's lucky, and I'm sure we could think of something else. The Baudelaire orphans looked at one another, and then at Charles and Phil, the only people in Paltryville who had been kind to them. Although they would not miss the dormitory or the terrible casseroles or the back-breaking labor of the mill, the orphans would miss these two kinds of people. These two kind people. And as the siblings thought about whom they would miss, they thought of how much they would have missed one another if something worse had happened to them. What if Sonny had lost the sword fight? What if Klaus had remained hypnotized forever? What if Violet had stepped into the path of the saw instead of Dr. Orwell? The Baudelaires looked at the sunlight pouring through the shattered window where Count Olaf had escaped and shuddered to think of what could have happened. Being alive had never seemed lucky before, but as the children considered their terrible time in Sir's care, they were amazed at how many lucky things had actually happened to them. It was lucky, Violet admitted quietly, that Klaus invented something so quickly even though he's not an inventor. It was lucky, Klaus admitted quietly, that Violet figured out how to end my hypnosis even though she's not a researcher. Cruyff, Sonny admitted quietly, which meant something like, it was lucky that I could defend us from Dr. Orwell's sword if I do say so myself. The children sighed and gave each other small, hopeful smiles. Count Olaf was on the loose and would try again to snatch their fortune, but he had not succeeded this time. They were alive, and as they stood together at the broken window, it seemed that the last word on their situation might be lucky, the word which had caused so much trouble to begin with. The Baudelaire orphans were alive, and it seemed that maybe they had an inordinate amount of luck, after all. That's the end of the book. Trying to catch up. Yeah, I think the Netflix series is very good. I'm also a big fan of the movie. I thought both were good, even though they were different from each other. I felt like they were both pretty good adaptations of the books. I'm not reading everything out loud, but I am reading everything. Don't be worried. Those kids are watching way too much Mrs. Doubtfire. I always make 4 pies in case I eat 3 pies before dinner. I don't have any cat cake. Yes, it was the tattoo that blew his cover. The baby has quite a way with words. Pancakes. Yeah, you'd think, Carly, wouldn't you? That he would just get the tattoo removed. Ooh, chocolate chip pancakes does sound amazing. That's okay. I never want to be in Lucky Smells anyway. Yeah. No, I don't hate you for it. I'm not a fan of peanut butter. If that's the way you enjoy your pancakes, then I am happy that you enjoy them that way. There are worse things to be hated for. Yeah, you could be Count Olaf. Oh, Nutella. Ugh. Ew? Did you say ew, Nutella? Come on, Tara. I like Nutella and strawberry crepes, excuse me. Yay for the book! Miserably good reading. It's okay. So good it's miserable. You're extremely worried now? What are you extremely worried about now? My tattoos always blow my cover. Thank V, I'm happy that you're happy. Yeah, live and let pancake. I'm glad that you thought it was delightful. I sounded very southern there for a second. Uh-oh, sometimes it comes out. Okay, before I wrap up the stream, I have to do the last part, which is the preview of the next book. So I'm going to read the preview to the next book. To my kind editor, please excuse the torn edges of this note. I'm writing to you from inside the shack the Baudelaire orphans were forced to live in while at Preux Rock Preparatory School, and I am afraid that some of the crabs tried to snatch my stationery away from me. On Sunday night, please purchase a ticket for seat 10J at the Erratic Opera Company's performance of the opera Faute de Mieux. During Act 5, use a sharp knife to rip open the cushion of your seat. There you should find my description of the children's miserable half-semester at boarding school entitled The Austere Academy, as well as a cafeteria tray, some of the Baudelaire's handmade staples, and the worthless jewel from Coach Gingus's turban. There is also the negative for a photograph of the two Quagmire triplets, which Mr. Helquist can have developed to help with his illustrations. Remember, you are my last hope that the tales of the Baudelaire orphans can finally be told to the general public. With all due respect, Lemony Snicket. And we're done with book 4. Hey Schmabby, how you doing? Great to see you. Perfect timing. You made it to the end. Oh, Tara was... Okay. Gotcha. I understand. The Summer, thank you for explaining. Alright, guys. I hope that was fun for you. That was fun for me. So, next stream I do will be Labyrinth of Lies. I'd like to try to finish up Labyrinth of Lies in the next stream, but I don't know if that's possible because that game's kind of long. Oh, Quagsire triplets. So, Labyrinth of Lies is the next game to complete. The next book I will be starting will be the Nancy Drew book that the 4th game is based on. So, Treasure in a Royal Tower, book version, will be the next book stream that I do, but that won't be my next stream. Once I finish Labyrinth of Lies, I will move on to Sea of Darkness, and that will be the end of the Nancy Drew series, and I will be done for a while playing those. I will probably revisit them in the future, but only on occasion and when I'm feeling like it and or per request. Then I'm going to go back. I've explained this before, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating and everybody's getting really bored at me repeating myself, but just in case you missed it, once I'm finished with the Nancy Drew series, I will be going back to finish Paper Mario 64 and Pokemon Emerald, since I am still in the middle of both of those games as well. Me and Mom, as we find time, will be finishing the Jurassic Park Telltale Games episodes. And my sister has expressed interest in trying to get me to stream some of the new Star Wars Battlefront with her. Oh, goodness, thank you so much for those bits. Tara, I appreciate that. So we can see. So anyway, we've got a lot going on. I'm still playing Narnia with Holland as we find the time to hang out and stream, which is not as often as we would both like, unfortunately. So anyway, I know I've got a lot going on, a lot of streams like halfway started, but just hang with me. I haven't abandoned really anything. So just I appreciate your patience. I appreciate all your support. You're welcome for the stream. Aw, your streams inspire you? I will do Star Wars. Oh, yay, Gloria. I'm glad you saw it. I work with that set a lot, actually. I do a lot of background stuff as a student in a lot of the episodes that have to do with the college student characters, but in that one episode I got to be the waitress, and so that was really fun. I'm glad you really liked it. Again, thank you for the bits, Terror. So anyway, I'm going to call it here, Star Wars. Um, you're welcome for streaming. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the night. Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon come out tomorrow. I'm super hyped. So I'll be fine in time to play that as well. So anyway, I'll see you guys as soon as I see you, which I'm sure will not be very far away. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. If anybody's traveling, because the holiday, since Thanksgiving's coming up next week, if anybody's traveling, please travel safe. Take care of yourself. As always, so much love from me to you. I'll leave you with a little bit more Pokemon music so you can enjoy the rest of your night. And I'll see y'all very soon. Bye. Wait a second. Wait a second. That was my 400th follower. If you are still here, I think it said Lemur Teamer. Oh my gosh. You're my 400th follower. Thank you so much. 400 hype. I don't know if anybody's even still here. 400 hype at the very end of my stream. Holy crud. Thank you so much. Wow. 400. Alright, anyway, good night, guys. I'm sorry for interrupting. Thank you for 400. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.